Well, hello, dear friends. Welcome back to another rant-filled session. Episode of Fantasy for Our Time with Richard Rowland for our third conversation on the Rings of Power. Richard, it's lovely to have you back.
I'm very happy to be here.
And before we get started, we do want to always try to start on a positive note. So Richard has some lovely news for all of us who are interested in fantasy media type stuff. So Richard, take it away.
Well, okay. So I'm really big on, we need to be telling our own stories. If you don't want big evil corporations like Amazon, just as an example,
and there we go.
Not related to anything else.
Right out the window.
But if you don't want big corporations kind of like controlling your imagination, and really most importantly, I think your children's imaginations, we need to be telling our own stories. I've been very open about how I believe that tabletop gaming can be a wonderful and effective way to do this. And so I am sort of putting my money where my mouth is, my writing where my mouth is. And that is, I have a fantasy setting that I've been working on for about 20 years now called The World Under Starlight. And earlier this summer, we published a little book with Darkly Bright Press called The Akborida. And there's actually a new production run of that out. So it'll be available November the 1st.
That's too long. It should be earlier.
Well, it's because they want to like save the new production run for the Inklings Festival at 8th Day, which is where it will be released, and I'll be there signing books.
Which means there won't be any available for any of us poor people who are not going.
Well,
to the festival,
I think that we did a few more copies this time, but anyway, we'll save one for you, Father. But
thank you.
Yeah, but so that's coming up. But after some a little bit of back and forth the last few weeks, I've been really excited. I'm very excited that I finally get to announce that we are going to be releasing an Emboria tabletop role-playing game. It won't just be a tabletop role-playing game. It'll be a tabletop role-playing game with a massive amount of lore, and by lore I mean poetry. It'll be the most poetry-heavy role-playing game that's ever been released. I say that with absolute confidence. It's going to be
absolute seriousness too.
Absolute seriousness, yeah. It'll be there'll be a core book with 3 adventures, which are enough for a beautiful mini campaign. And then also there's going to be a big campaign book that you could get many years of play out of. And that's going to be released for our own in-house system called the Clash system, which is what I've been running it with here at my house for the last 4 years. And then also there will be an OGL version released. So if you're one of those people who can't be bothered to learn new rules, but you're used to D&D 5th edition, then that'll be an easy kind of way for you to get into it. If that goes really well, there will be more stuff. I have lots and lots of plans. So if people go out and buy it, then that'll make sure it happens. So there will be a Kickstarter sometime in the spring, probably March or April. And that'll be where you can go and get these books. And in the meantime, I will be doing probably weekly development vlogs on my YouTube channel. You can just go look for Richard Rowland on YouTube. And so starting next week, I'm going to be doing weekly development vlogs. So Noelle asks, how do you find out about the Kickstarter, especially if you're not on Facebook? If you just follow me on YouTube, if you look up Richard Rowland on YouTube, I have a little channel there where I've done like 4 or 5 videos, but there's going to be a lot more stuff because I'm going to start doing weekly videos on the project. So that's the best way to keep up with it. You can also go to, the game's going to be published by Strange Owl Games, is the name of the company. This is a great new tabletop gaming company that is actually just was part of a much larger company, and they sort of spun this off. So it's strangeowlgames.com, all one word. And basically everything is going to be there. And I'm going to just ask people who are listening to this live, don't tell anybody until Tuesday, which is when the official announcement will come out. But I can talk about it now because all the contracts have been signed and we're officially in business. So I'm really excited about this. I think at some point, Father, you and I will get together and talk about this some more, and
absolutely.
talk about the importance of it as a method of subcreation and things like that. So,
we have such conversations in the pipeline.
There's so many conversations to have. Yeah.
Well, why not? And Noelle, to answer your question, also, I will be telling you all about it. repeatedly. So don't worry about it. You will hear. You don't need to be on Facebook to know anything. In fact, just ignore it. Ignore Facebook. Just get
Stay
off
off of Facebook.
Yes. With
sure.
that pleasant thought of avoiding social media, etc., let's start talking about episodes 6 and 7 of The Rings of Power. Now, I think I'm going to be going on a long bit of Richard less conversation here because we're starting with the positives, Richard, and apparently you have none to say. So I'm going to go for a while.
I mean, maybe I have some things. Okay, just go ahead and start. I'll chime in. Just start.
That's good. All right. Okay, so I have to say that I skipped through much of episode 6's battle just because. Okay, I'll be, and here we go. This is not me being positive, but this is the way to enjoy episodes 6 and 7. Now, if you're somebody who likes mindless action that has no purpose, then go ahead, watch episode 6. It's for you. You're going to enjoy a lot of it, especially if you enjoyed episode 1 of the new Wheel of Time series. I think it was choreographed by the same people. It's about the same level of intelligent action. So
I didn't know it was choreographed by the same people.
I don't know either. It just feels like it. So I'm just assuming that it is. I don't know that it is. But let's just say that you are with me and you've skipped through most of the stupid fighting. There are some really nice things that happen, I think, in episode 6 and 7, especially episode 7. But there is more and more, the further we get away from that fateful and unfortunate line of you have to touch the darkness to know the light or whatever it was, because it's not important to remember the actual line. I'm really liking that they seem to be, if not in the dialogue, but at least in the action and in the interaction of the characters, they seem to be going away from that comment as the guiding light of season 1, which is, I think we were all afraid that was going to be what was happening, especially in the friendships of Durin and Elrond, and even Galadriel and Halbrand. Now, I'll explain a little bit what I mean. I really think that the Durin and Elrond friendship was beautifully rendered in episode 7.
Agreed.
I think that finally we got past let's make fun of the dwarves thing. Let's stop using dwarves as the butt of all of our jokes. We finally got past that, and we let the actors just play the character as a person. And Elrond really surprised me in his real humility as a character, and the actor's ability to show it, the sincerity of the friendship that didn't have it all of a saccharine quality to it. I really liked that they weren't fudging it in my face that they're friends. It was just happening on screen. There was a lot of stuff happening in between spoken lines. There was a lot of good camera angles. It felt like a really well-realized friendship, so that Durin's decision first to countermand his father's command in the beginning, and then, as this will probably happen, he's probably going to depose him in some way in episode 8 is what I think is going to happen, which is a very difficult thing to set up in a realistic way, especially in a Tolkien-inspired world, because any sort of action against established order, especially in a monarchic world, you're going to have to really do a lot of work to make it work. I think they did a really nice job, because it's clear that what Durin III is doing is wrong, and the reason that what he's doing is wrong is not because of the racism of the dwarves, but because it doesn't allow for virtue to be expressed through relationship. And they're doing that really well with Durin and Elrond, and even in Galadriel and Halbrand, although there was still that bizarre like specter of possible romance that was going on that I didn't understand, that I didn't like, but they're both good for each other in the sense that they're preventing each other from allowing the darkness to engulf them totally. And it's because of their friendship, not because of the romance, I think. And both of those are actually engaging me in a way that I didn't expect to be engaged after episode 2 or 3. So I'm happy about that.
Okay, so Galadriel and Halbrand, just to kind of mention the romance thing, an article did come out with the actress who plays Galadriel talking about the sexual tension between the characters. And
as a thing that's part of the show? As
a thing that's part of the show, defining it as sexual tension and saying that Galadriel is afraid of what she's going to do because she knows that she always gets whatever she wants, but it's not always good for her.
Okay.
And
I hate when actors talk. I think actors should stop talking because that was not necessarily what was going on.
It didn't have to be,
in those
but
scenes. No, it didn't.
now they're sort of
But now it is.
identifying it and saying, yeah. So that's the thing. Like there was that moment at the end of the episode. I was like, I'm not sure I like where this is going.
Mhm.
And then but then the actress came out and confirmed, yeah, it's intended to be sexual tension. And that they're going
Lame.
this is going to be an aspect going on in the rest of the show. And with the reveal that Galadriel actually has been married.
Yes.
Um,
yes. Finally, Celeborn makes an appearance.
I mean, okay,
All right,
so
talk to me about that, Richard. Talk to me about that.
Okay,
Go ahead.
So I've been saying for a while that it's a major lacuna in Galadriel's character that she's not married at this point.
Yeah.
The
so clearly they heard you and they stuck it in.
Clearly they heard me and they said, yeah, no. So I mean, because the thing is like married Galadriel is a totally kind of it's just a totally different animal, right? Totally different character. For all the reasons that we talked about in previous episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And I continue to believe very strongly that this version of the character, even with the improvements that we saw in her in episode 7, where she's trying to help Theo walk away from the darkness so he doesn't repeat her mistakes. That was nice. That was actually a conversation I liked. Okay, so there's a thing I liked.
Yay!
But I continue to feel that this character is a total mischaracterization to the point that she's not really Galadriel at all. She's something else, right?
I've stopped thinking of her as Galadriel actually, and that helped me enjoy episode 7 more.
But the fact that she actually was married to Celeborn and he's basically MIA.
Yes. He's clearly going to show up. As part of her
clearly going to show up. And now the part of me that grew up in a house full of sisters where we watched way too many Christie movies. I don't know.
Not a bad problem to have. This is.
I don't know if this is a reference anybody else gets, but I have a deep fear that what we're going to end up getting is a love triangle where she's going to progressively fall for Halbrand, and then Celeborn's going to show up, and it's going to be like, oh, your husband is not actually dead. He was just captured by the bad guys and is probably super tortured. Like, I don't know what they're going to do, and at this point, I cannot accurately predict what the showrunners are,
because they don't seem to be following any sort of logic. So let's just hope that your logic, which is very good, is going to be ignored by the showrunners, who seem to be ignoring logic consistently, and they're just going to do the good thing, which is to make Celeborn part of her arc of becoming the fully recognizable Galadriel.
Yeah, I hope that's what we're going to get. The other thing that the other kind of wrinkle in the whole Halbrand Galadriel thing is that I think after episode 6 is very clear that Halbrand is definitely probably half of Sauron.
Half of Sauron?
Yeah. So if you all right, theory time.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah. So if you listen to what Adar says, he says that like Halbrand clearly remembers Adar.
Yeah.
And keeps asking, like, do you recognize me? Do you know me? Do you know who I am? Et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
What Adar says when he's talking about Sauron is that, Sauron's quest for, basically what's going to end up being the One Ring.
Yeah.
Was destroying all of Adar's children. And so Adar split him in half. That's what he says. He
said split him open. He didn't say split him in half. He said
did he not?
Open.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I think so.
I think he said I split him in 2. Okay, we'll go back and you guys.
We'll have to confirm that.
You don't have to go back and look, audience. I will go back and look for you to save you watching episode 6 again. But he says something like this, and the input that I'm getting from that, plus all of the ominous foreshadowings regarding Halbrand, for instance.
You mean bludgeoning across the forehead? Is that what you mean by foreshadowing?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, okay. All right. Got it.
I think that it is quite likely that there's like a sort of like there's a good Sauron and a bad Sauron out there.
Oh god, no. You got to be kidding me. That would be the worst.
I'm not saying it's going to be good, but I think that is where things are going. Is that Halbrand is like the good half but maybe he's got a little bad in him, but out there somewhere there's like a bad half of Sauron, and at some point they're going to. No, I don't think so. Noel asks if the Fallen Star Wizard is the power part of Sauron. I don't think so. I still don't really get what's going on with the stranger, but who knows? Maybe
they keep showing the moon. It's really weird. They keep showing the moon in reference to the stranger.
And they
shows
may
up
be
again and again and again.
And I've seen some people theorize that he's supposed to be the man in the moon. Like,
I think it's a red herring.
Yeah, I can't imagine they would do the
puzzle box storytelling likes to give you details that have no meaning.
Yeah. So anyway, so I think that's quite likely that Halbrand is just like half of Sauron running around, and at some point he's gonna get like the rest of his Sauron juice back, and he's gonna be Sauron, which will have meant that Galadriel had sexual tension with Sauron.
That's really lame. So you're thinking it's like he's divided his force into like the physical part and the unseen part, and the unseen part is out there somewhere like gathering power, and then it like will possess him, something like this.
Maybe, or it's in like a stupid kind of a Horcrux sort of a thing.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I think that at some point Halbrand is going to, like, he's not currently like full Sauron, but at some point he's going to become that. That's kind of my current feel. Again, there could be a lot of red herrings, but just based on the vibe that they were trying to give us in episode 6, over and over again. And also, it's not totally clear, unless I missed it in episode 6. It's not totally clear how the lightsaber that is a key was given to the bad guys. But Halbrand may have done the switcheroo. That's kind of my.
No, Adar gives it to Walt to the man before.
Oh, okay.
Before Numenor comes. So
I must have.
You don't see it. You don't see it on. It happens very quickly. You don't see it. On screen.
It was like a week. It's been like a week or so since.
Yeah.
So okay. So
it was a throwaway scene. So yeah.
Can we talk about then the like the whole Numenor thing?
Okay, let's talk about the whole Numenor thing. We're gonna jump. We're not gonna be all positive and then move to the negative. We're just gonna embrace. Embrace the chaos, baby.
So episode 6 really bugged me. I found more things that I liked in episode 7, but episode 6 really bugged me for a whole host of reasons. And not just on you changed the Tolkien story, guys. Not just on that level.
Yeah.
But on the level of bad cinematography.
Yeah.
Bad choreography.
Yep.
And like really kind of like sloppy continuity errors. I don't know if you spotted it or saw people talking about it, but they literally copy and pasted a bunch of extras over and over again in one scene.
No, I didn't notice. I wasn't paying attention.
So if you go back and look at the scene where Bronwyn is addressing the people and she's giving her pretty lousy inspirational speech. Adar's
they can't do inspirational speeches. Yes. Okay. So Adar and the orcs are by far the most interesting characters in the entire show.
Why are they the best people in the show?
I don't know. I really
like this. Frustrates me. Yeah.
Yes.
So Bronwyn's giving her. We'll come back to that.
Yes.
So Bronwyn is giving her inspirational speech, and the camera pans out over the crowd, and if you just pause it, you can see that they have the same clump of people that they have copied, pasted, rotated a few degrees to one direction or the other, all the way across the screen.
No.
If you look closely at just freeze frame on some of the Numenorian armor, a lot of it is just like screen printed onto fabric. And so this is one of those things where the scene where everybody was getting on the boat and we saw the Numenorians in their armor the first time, that was beautiful. And I think it had to do somewhat with like the ethereal lighting and all this other stuff. But once they get to Middle Earth, once there are actual action scenes,
the money ran out.
Well, it really feels like that. And I don't get it because they're spending like $60 million an episode on this thing. And it's the most expensive, show ever produced. And yet we're getting some very cheaply made shots. And a lot of this, I think, comes from the deep laziness that has crept into filmmaking because of the green screen.
Yeah, totally.
And this is really Peter Jackson's fault, because he was the first one. Not that green screens didn't exist before, but Jackson's first trilogy was the first time that we were ever able to like basically just film the majority of a film just in front of a green screen, and it be a huge, successful hit. And
Are you talking about the Hobbit movies, or are you talking about the original trilogy?
the original, I mean, the originals weren't totally in front of a green screen. The Hobbit movies basically were.
Yeah,
But
because he used a lot of practical effects. He was very careful
he
to do
did, but there was also like, um I remember at the time, and you can also see this if you go back and watch like the special features and stuff at the end of the Blu-rays. They make a really big deal about the green screen use, which was really cutting edge at the time.
Yeah. Okay. And honestly, if you want to blame green screen usage, you have to blame George Lucas, if you're honest, because the prequels were entirely
100%.
digital. They were entirely digital. That was where it started. So it's his fault. So
yeah, and I even saw a very interesting piece. I didn't actually watch the new Thor: Love and Thunder movie yet.
Me neither.
Probably won't.
No.
But Christian Bale, who I rather like.
I love him.
As just like an amazing.
Maybe I'll just watch his scenes. Like, I'm sure YouTube will have like a cut of only gore scenes.
Yeah, but I mean, like, obviously Bale is a great actor. It's like water is wet. Christian Bale's a great actor.
Yeah, pretty much.
Actually, just like little trivia for everyone out there: the first Christian Bale movie I ever saw was a remake of Treasure Island, in which he was Jack, like the young boy.
No way.
So he's a little kid, and Long John Silver is played by Charlton Heston.
No way.
In a totally amazing performance. So if you ever need like Christian Bale,
like a TV movie.
I don't think so. I think it was made for Disney or something. I remember it had like
it's one of those. Okay, so they had this Disney had this period where they were remaking everything for VHS. I remember this. Yeah.
And it's a great, well, first of all, it's a great movie, and secondly, I do remember as a child, like, it had a sort of a shocking, what to me at the time was a shocking amount of profanity, because Long John Silver constantly says "damn your eyes," which is in the book. And I was like a little concerned about it, and I asked my mom. She's like, "Well, that's how pirates talk." I was like, "Oh, okay." But don't you talk language that way? Okay, I won't. Yeah, that's pirate speak.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Since we're on trivia, trivia, hold on. Since we're on trivia,
yes, please.
What was Christian Bale's first movie?
Was it Henry V?
It was. Yes, indeed.
Kenneth Branagh.
Kenneth Branagh's Henry V. Yes,
that is probably my favorite movie.
Of all time.
Yeah, probably of all time. I watch it.
I'm sorry, but his speech, his St. Crispin's Day speech, is incredible. It is. I just, on the day, on that day, on St. Crispin's Day, I just watched that scene.
So every year in my house, on St. Crispin's Day, we have a viewing party. We watch Henry V.
Yeah.
And we make cobbler because St. Crispin was a cobbler. And
awesome.
It's just a dumb pun, but it's a good excuse to eat.
I love it. It's fantastic.
So it's a big thing in my house. All my kids like have a speech memorized. It's not because I made them memorize it, just because they've
seen it so many times.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, I love that movie. I love that movie. So my
How
brain
did we
is not
get
focusing.
Here? Christian Bale.
I just have to say, I once saw Michael York portray Falstaff in like live, and
I can see that.
Oh, so great!
I can totally see that. Yeah.
So Christian Bale came out in an interview talking about how much he hated working on The Dark World, and what he said was like that the green screen work was just the most boring thing that he's ever done, and he never wants to do anything like that again. And there's something about it that I think has really let's say enervated, really sapped the life out of a lot of our fantasy and sci-fi productions. I mean, I will take hokey cardboard sets from like Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I'll take that over elaborate CGI any day of the week, because those actors,
lizard men from the original series over
100%, like, because the actors on those old sets, they know the sets are not great, and so they are just acting like their hearts out, trying to sell this thing.
That's right.
As opposed to, hey, well, we'll fix it in post. Let's let the CGI sell it. All that to say, the Numenorians, who I thought looked amazing when they disembarked or when they embarked from Numenor, looked really bland. Like
Yeah,
really
well, and it really
nothing
didn't help.
happened.
It really didn't help that, well, they weren't helped by the cinematography in a different way, and it's clear that a lot of the filmmaking, the cinematography, and the dialogue in this series is trying to take advantage of the Easter egg thing, thinking that if we recall visually and vocally certain aspects of Peter Jackson's trilogy, then people will automatically perk up and not merely forgive us our sins, but will that is enough. That is, in lieu of actual good filmmaking, good storytelling, let's just pile on a bunch of Easter eggs. And it's especially egregious when it doesn't work, right? So for me personally, the I wasn't happy about Helm's Deep becoming the centerpiece of the Two Towers, because it's a throwaway chapter, really. I mean, there's not much that happens there. So to make it into a 45-minute long battle in the Two Towers movie was, to me personally, a little bit annoying. And they really kind of expanded and drew out the drama in such a way that it was annoying. There was too much going on. That being said, the rescue, of course it was Aemir, and that was lame. It shouldn't have been Aemir, but anyway, the rescue of led by Gandalf the White from the top of the hill, as they're charging down with the most incredible music you have ever heard.
I mean,
the most cinematic cinematography. I mean, it looks like a painting by Alan Lee or John Howe. It really does. I mean, if you're going to use green screen, at least do it like that. It's one of my favorite scenes in the trilogy. It really is. It's, I mean, I weep just every time I see it. It doesn't matter. It's just so well done. And clearly they were trying to evoke this and working on, hoping that the memory of it is going to cause the same effect. They totally mess it up, because so the reason that, in a storytelling sense, the reason that the Helm's Deep rescue works is because Gandalf leaves at the beginning of the battle, before the battle. Right. Okay, so we know that this is what we're waiting for. And the longer his absence stretches out, the more tension is created by the movie. And if it goes on 45 minutes, the tension is quite significant. So when he comes, it is a fulfillment of a promise given at the beginning of the scene of the series of scenes of the storyline, right? So it's immensely rewarding.
And that tension works no matter how many times you've seen the movie.
Of course. Yeah, because it's good storytelling.
Right. That's the sign of good storytelling. And that's a truly medieval way of creating tension. Poems like Beowulf don't create tension by making you wonder what's going to happen next.
Yes.
You already know what's going to happen next. The tension comes from, okay, are we at the good part yet?
Yes.
When's the good part coming?
Exactly.
Right?
Which is actually what people really want. We don't like
100%.
I mean, no matter what Hollywood thinks, we really don't like the stretching out of the uncertainty forever. It's just annoying. And most of the time, especially nowadays, what people will do, they'll just go to the end to find out what it is, and then go back and they'll enjoy it more because they know the answer, and now they can see how it's all uncovered. So in fact, like in a lot of the mystery or puzzle box movies, the second viewing is oftentimes a lot more rewarding, because you know what's happening and now you can see how it unfolds. That's why Agatha Christie's novels work so well, because you most of the time you can guess who the bad guy is, and you're trying to figure out as you go, because she gives you all the
information you need.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. With a few red herrings thrown in, just for good measure. So it really doesn't work here, because first of all, the idea that this expedition from Numenor is going to magically arrive exactly at this tiny little village in the south is so, it strains the imagination, even for those of us who know we're watching fantasy and we expect a certain what do we say, what's the term that we use when we suspension of disbelief. Yeah. Oh dear, my camera died.
Oh no.
Yeah, my camera's like, stop talking, you're being ridiculous. Just turned off. So I mean, that in itself is really silly, and that raises a different question, which we'll talk about later, which is something that I have a problem with, which is the problem of scale. But that's in the problem section. We're going to leave it to the end. So suddenly intersperse. Yeah, good. I'm glad. So weirdly intersperse scenes of horsemen riding towards something in the middle of a battle in episode 6 does nothing. It does absolutely nothing other than to say, "Look, we're doing Helm's Deep. Look, we're doing Helm's Deep." It doesn't work.
It would have been very, very little work to try to set up that tension, like if we had been given a scene where Galadriel and the Númenóreans land, and they receive word of, and like Arondir and Bronwyn, like they sent somebody off for help. And
yes,
they were
it's
like,
not that hard. Exactly, a scout.
Right.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, we found out at the end of episode 7 that that Pelargir is still a populated Númenórean settlement.
Yes.
Which okay, so I guess that means that the Númenóreans have been to Middle Earth before, which is nice to know. We haven't had any indications of that otherwise.
No, and it kind of messes it all up, really. Just the mention of Pelargir really messed the whole thing up, because I thought that before they mentioned Pelargir, it was kind of like, okay, I can see how this whole weird storyline doesn't fit into anything might work. It's kind of like a foray into Middle Earth before the great invasion of the fallen Númenóreans, right? Because they haven't fallen yet, right? So this could be a kind of like advanced party. I could possibly get on board with that, but the mention of Pelargir ruined that because they've been there already.
Right. And but also Pelargir is where they would have had to land to get to Mordor. They're I mean, it's like that or Umbar, right? Yep. And so my question is, like, where did you land your ships? I mean, again, this is but all they would have had to do to make kind of all this fit is for Arondir to say there is a settlement of Númenóreans at Pelargir. They're the only people nearby. We've got to send someone for help. And Bronwyn says they'll never come help us. We sided with Morgoth. And Arondir says it's our only shot. And they send somebody. They could send Theo. Theo's like, I'll go, right? And so Theo runs off to Pelargir, gets there just as the Númenórean ships are arriving.
Brilliant. I love it. Why aren't you writing the
Galadriel, and Galadriel says, okay, show me the way, because take me to your mom, right? She always wants to be taken to whoever's in charge. So you can just be like, take me to your mom.
See, Richard, you're even willing to work within the confines of this absurd show. Just give him $1 billion, everybody. Come on.
It would have taken very little work to set that up, and would have made the whole thing more compelling, because then it's like, oh, okay, the Galadriel and the Númenóreans know that they're on a timetable, right? They're not just showing up randomly. They know that they're on a timetable. They have to get there. It would have established Pelargir as an important, like, site of a previous Númenórean interaction on the continent. That could have done a whole lot of work, which would have helped with the logistics of this whole thing. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit, because there are a lot of problems with the logistics, but
really weird problems.
Yeah, weird problems. But anyway, so they have this scene of the Númenóreans, of the hundreds of Númenóreans, which apparently fit on the 4 small vessels. They have the Númenóreans riding to aid, and one of the amazing things is that they seem, between several shots, they keep forgetting what time of day it's supposed to be. During the battle, they keep forgetting where different people are supposed to be located on the battlefield. The battle had a very grindy pace to it, and so I mean, the orc with the blood spurting out of his eye was super gross and unnecessary. But the worst thing about the battle to me was that they only, basically, there was only one. So a good battle scene should tell a story. And so I'm not a fan of pointless violence for the sake of violence. But if the battle, if the battle is gory but it's telling like a specific story, then I'm not bothered by it. I just, because we're driving towards a certain point. This battle, the only story that this battle was capable of telling was a basic trope where you have a character fights his way through a bunch of mooks, and then he gets to a boss, and he gets beat up by the boss, and he's about to get killed by the boss, and then somebody stabs the boss from behind. His girlfriend. Well, but then they do this with other characters, and so that it's basically like the whole battle is just a series of last minute saves, where it's true. where somebody and that's the entire progression of the battle, and it feels really grindy, it feels really repetitive, and there's no actual sense of danger. I do not actually feel like, oh, Arondir might get it here. Why? Because I know that his girlfriend is going to stab the orc in the back, or hit him with a frying pan, or whatever the heck.
I mean, it's so obvious. You're waiting for it, and they keep panning to back and forth between his face and the boss's face and his face, and they're like, "Oh, is it going to be this scene? Oh no, here it comes. Oh no, wait, no, here it comes. Nowhere. Oh, there it is. Woohoo!" Yep.
So I mean, so this is the frustrating thing, is because it, not that that kind of suspense is a goal that we're going for anyway, but when that's all you have and then you don't even give us that, a better way to build suspense about a battle is to, well, I mean, I think the Helm's Deep battle in the Two Towers is actually pretty good example of building suspense. We have some ups, we have some downs, and then
it was a well-designed battle.
Yeah,
I agree.
and then finally, we're in the inner keep, and everything is hopeless, and Theoden is like, all right, guys, one last ride, and Aragorn's
what can we do against such reckless hate?
Yes, you can ride forth. And and what a great scene. Gimli blows the freaking horn of Helm Hammerhand.
Love it.
I mean, so there are, and the thing is, you were like, okay, even if these guys die or if they live, doesn't matter. This is awesome, right? Mm-hmm. That's what you but
especially on a big screen. I mean, them riding down, it's a really long shot, and it's very wide, and they're riding down the incline, and the orcs are just flying back and forth, and they stay there. It's like a single long shot, which you never have in modern cinema ever.
Right.
And they just linger and linger and linger, and it just pulls you right in. It's so good. It's so good.
But so, and this, what do we get? We get Galadriel dodging arrows in full plate armor on the back of a horse, which, okay,
while doing circus numbers.
I'll accept that elves can do that, but basically they were like, we have this one cool stunt. Let's do it a bunch of times. Mm-hmm. And really, other than that, I mean, there's the Númenóreans riding in and attacking, like where they're just coming in. At first they show them, I mean, this is another continuity error, right? Because they show the Númenóreans like right of the Rohirrim, like a big long battle, and then when they actually get to the village, they have somehow formed into two columns. Mm-hmm. And they're like just coming in and so it's a bunch of like between the sort of the bad CGI copy and pasting, the screen printed armor, the basic continuity errors in the battle, and just kind of the grindy and pointless feel of the battle. Yeah. Like the battle scene really failed for me.
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
It didn't have to like Númenóreans fighting orcs. That should be an easy sell. Like any Tolkien fan. Like, who doesn't want to see that?
But it's almost, I don't know. It's almost, I mean, we'll get into this later, but it's almost like they don't want you to spend too much time glorying in the vision of Númenóreans killing orcs, because apparently orcs have the secret fire. But we'll get there. I don't want to talk about that yet, because I still want to say a few positive things. And
go for it.
Since we're in what will eventually become Mordor, I thought that it was an inspired choice by the writers to reference the best scene in Lord of the Rings. So when the family is preparing for battle, Theo comes up to his mom, and there's this absolutely inane conversation that they have. Do you remember when I used to have bad dreams? She goes, yes, I remember. Remember you used to tell me? Yes, I will tell you now what I used to tell you. I mean, it's like, come on, man. Like my 8-year-old can write better dialogue than that. But that being said, she references the scene in Mordor when Sam and Frodo are at the end of their tether, and they look up and there's the star, right? And one of the absolutely greatest scenes of all time. So on the one hand, you might look at it as a kind of bastardization and misuse of the greatest scene in Lord of the Rings. On the other hand, I thought that they actually managed to do it fairly well. It didn't feel forced to me. It didn't feel false. I thought that in that place, considering that this is a very tragic story, that the Southlands are about to be overrun. And yeah, I'm not crazy about them as characters. I know that the battle was garbage, but in that moment I was like, okay, I can get on board with this. This is actually not bad.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. It was a nice scene. I think that the bad dialogue kind of put me off, but it was a nice antidote to you have to touch the darkness.
Yes, for sure. And it's actually kind of nice that it's in that setting, in the setting of Mordor, that we get the right attitude towards the shadow, which is interesting. I mean, we'll talk about Galadriel again. We keep talking about Galadriel, but there's something I want to say about her a little bit later. But there's also one more thing, and this is connected with the shadow is but a passing thing, which is the quote specifically that they echo from Lord of the Rings. But I do like that Galadriel seems to be growing very slowly, in her, especially in the way she expresses the language that she uses to express providence, because it goes from let's touch the darkness to that scene in the prison where she won't say it, right? She won't say that there is such a thing as providence, as the gods. She just suggests it in this kind of annoying way to Halbrand, right? She it's almost like the writers are like, yeah, we're talking about God, but we don't want you all to be offended by God talk. But actually it works for her character arc because clearly she could become the villain of this piece. So when she within the scene with Theo, in the clearest way expresses that this could all be part of the design, right? Of those who are, singing the movement of the sphere, so to speak. And Theo's very, realistic response, I don't see the design in her. I mean, completely humble answer of I haven't figured it out yet. I actually thought that was, in terms of her character arc, okay, this isn't Galadriel. Let's just pretend that this is some sort of other character that accidentally got named the same name as the wonderful character that we know from Tolkien. But
can we call her Sadriel or like Demandriel?
Demandriel. I like that. All right. In Demandriel's character arc, this moment felt authentic, it felt real, and I liked that they committed enough to actually suggest that there is a design and it's okay that you don't know it. And this doesn't mean that God is wrong. It just means you haven't figured it out yet. So I actually appreciated that scene.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think her conversation with Theo was the best thing about episode 7, because it showed like a turn coming for her character. A
slight dip into humility where she actually asked forgiveness for half a second.
And you could almost say it sort of came after a baptism of fire, right?
Well, let's talk about the baptism of fire a little bit later, and the wonderful physics that exist in Middle Earth.
Yes.
But
so the thing that I thought was really interesting is that is the nice imagery they gave of when she goes to talk with Muriel, who is blind now.
Yeah. Weird. I don't feel anything as far as that goes. Like I'm like, okay, it's not a reference to something. Are we supposed to feel like there's a lot of loss here? I don't understand the choice,
I don't really feel like a deep investment in that particular character. So,
but does maybe it seem to have any symbolic.
That's the thing. Like it doesn't seem to have any kind of like symbolic resonance, except that if I wanted to be really generous, I'd say her father is Tar Palantir, the far seer, and so maybe this is Muriel, the not seer. That's all I got.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But maybe they'll do something with that. Maybe she'll like start using the Palantir to see things, but she only
maybe
who the heck knows.
Yeah.
But when she goes to her, she bows. And remember that Galadriel didn't want to bow initially.
That's right. Yeah.
Halbrand had to make her bow, and now she bows sort of willingly. And so there is like some humility, which is like the nicest thing about her character so far, but also kind of out of keeping for who Galadriel should be by now, right? That she is
clearly, yeah.
Like the again, just to reiterate, the actual complex Galadriel character you want to tell is she's proud, which is part of why she doesn't go back to Valinor when she has the opportunity. She wants to stay and have a realm of her own, right? And they somehow managed to not give us that version of Galadriel. Like there could have been and I've said this before, but there could have been a way to write her as a really complicated and flawed character and still be true to basically what Tolkien envisioned for what he envisioned Second Age Galadriel to be. But anyway, but all that to say, I thought that was a nice kind of callback to that moment. I thought it was a nice little bit of symmetry in the character, and I know we're winding towards the finale.
We'll talk about the finale and what we think will happen later. But the final thing that I want to talk about is the final positive thing I want to talk about before we go into the more interesting stuff. Let's be honest, people, you're here not to hear us come up with faint praise, but to rant. Is I actually personally I like showing Adar as the corrupted proto-orc, corrupted elf proto-orc. I think that's a cool idea. We know that that's a possibility in Tolkien's vision of who the orcs are.
Sure.
To actually see that, of course, you do need to allow for the compression of time. and it's a little bit silly in terms of actual practical necessity of how the corrupted elf could suddenly give birth to an entire army of completely twisted beings. That's silly, of course, but we're dealing with a timeline that needs to be compressed. So let's just give them the benefit of that doubt.
Basically this is a 2-age Middle Earth that we're getting.
Yes.
There was First Age, and now we're in the Third Age.
Yeah.
Like we're in like the last 5 years of the Second Age at this point. So effectively, there was not a Second Age.
Right. Or they're trying to tell the Second Age in the span of not an age, but half a decade, like you said.
Yeah.
So that just makes it more difficult to make these decisions realistic. And pretty much many of the problems that we're going to be talking about today are problems of time compression. So considering the fact that they have so many hours to tell the story, I still don't understand why they're spending so many hours having the same scene in Harfootland over and over and over again, where the entire thing could have just been compressed into a single episode, and instead I hate to do this. I really hate to do this, but I've been watching the House of Dragon with my glasses off, and I have very terrible vision. So I'm watching it only because I need to have, not I need to, but I feel like I need to be on top of cultural trends, because this is what we do here in Fantasy for Our Time. But I really have to take my glasses off because the sex is getting out of control. So I did, and still, even with this, I'm not even watching most of it. I'm just kind of skipping around. They have time jumps like crazy in this show, and it works. They can expand time in a single season in a way that continues the dramatic tension given in the first few episodes. That would be so easy to do in a series where you're covering a huge span of time. You just have to be brave enough to commit,
right,
to allow the audience to just be brave enough to think that, okay, the audience is going to stay with us long enough to understand that these creative tensions can last hundreds of years, which is a central tenet to what Tolkien talks about anyway. These things are universal themes. They keep persisting over generations, over centuries. That's the point of the Silmarillion. We have thousands of years that pass, and we keep making the same mistakes. That's the point. You don't need to compress everything. You can let it happen. So, okay, slight small rant over. There'll be more later. Stay tuned. But that being said, setting that aside, I like that they committed to Adar being the corrupted elf as the prototype for the orcs. Just the idea. I think it's a good idea. What about you?
I think it's a very cool character concept. I feel basically the same way. I've never had an issue. And again, there's been a lot of mud slung in the media recently against purists.
Yeah.
Right. By which they mean people like me,
yes.
who, like have strong feelings about the way that, about the goodness of the story that Tolkien told.
Yes.
And the dangers of kind of meddling with that. But just again, I've been on record multiple times in saying my idea of a faithful adaptation is not, you don't add a single thing, right?
Yeah. Yep.
You look at the story that somebody told. In this case, you look at the story that Tolkien told, and then you see, where are the gaps that I can write my story into, right? And this is a fine and totally plausible gap. For like a little bit of a lore explanation for people who don't know, this is one of several versions of the origins of the orcs that Tolkien never finalized. Committed
okay,
to.
So Richard, you talked about this in an Amansul episode a while back, and I really liked that episode.
Yeah.
But I don't think everybody has heard it. So I want you to go deep on what Tolkien thought about orcs and what the possible versions of that might be.
Right. So Tolkien had a few different ideas. In one sense, Tolkien was always bound by a very sort of Augustinian commitment that evil can't create anything on its own.
Yeah.
So then that leads to a difficult question of, okay, well, where do orcs as sort of sentient or maybe semi-sentient beings of like hatred and malice, where do they come from? And Tolkien,
and why are there so many of them, and why do they keep reproducing?
Right. So Tolkien originally worked off of the theory that that they were sort of created from the stone and then they were filled with evil spirits. Basically, you could say like fallen Maiar, right? So that the like original orc commanders would have been these powerful elemental spirits, and then of course they become more and more inbred and sort of debased as time goes on.
Which is a really cool idea.
Which is a cool idea. That's actually the origin of dwarves originally, by the way. In the Book of Lost Tales, dwarves were Morgoth's, or at the time Melko, who was called Morgoth, were Melko's first attempt to create servants, but the dwarves were like too they were resistant. They were too stubborn, and so he had to sort of scrap that project, and the dwarves just go off on their own and become their own thing.
Yeah.
And that is actually still the version of the origin of the dwarves that Tolkien has in his mind when he starts writing The Hobbit. Yeah. And it's over the course of The Hobbit that dwarves become the good guys.
That's right. Because initially they're not trustworthy.
Yeah. At the beginning of the book, it says dwarves are not heroes, right? But by the time you get to the end, Thorin is like, and his nephews, they're like going out, they're fighting, heroic last stand. They're clearly heroes, right?
Yep.
But so like, but you can sort of see like Tolkien kind of falls in love with the dwarves more as he goes on. So anyway, and then he goes back and like comes up with a whole Aule backstory for the dwarves and for the Ents. Which is great, but it's also just a reminder that Tolkien was so good at retconning things that people sometimes don't realize when a retcon is happening. So that was the first origin for orcs that he worked up, and then later on he at one stage he had this idea that the orcs were twisted elves, like Morroquendi, who'd been captured very, very early on by Melkor's servants and then twisted and corrupted in some way.
Right.
Tolkien didn't stick with that idea for a couple of reasons. One is that it doesn't really elves have a sort of famously low reproduction rate, and
it wouldn't account for the vast numbers of
but the other issue is, of course, that as anybody who's actually read the Silmarillion or any of the other really like the kind of like the deeper lore knows, elves don't die. Like if an elf gets killed in battle, they go to the halls of Mandos. They
come back.
They do a stay in Mandos depending on how much they sucked or didn't suck, and then after that stay is over, so it's like a little purgatory kind of a thing. And then after that stay is over, they're released and they get a new body, and they go back into the world. In this case, Valinor, but they go back into the world. So elves are always reincarnated. Which is part of why their birth rate is so low. And by the way, Finrod Filigan, we are told, alone of all the Noldor who perished in Middle Earth, had no weight in the halls of Mandos because he was so noble, because he gave his life out sacrificially for Beren. He flew right out. So if Galadriel really wanted to see her brother, she should have stayed on that boat, because he would have been like waiting on the shore, been like, "What's up, sister? I've been waiting for you." But anyway, so then this sort of raises a problem. If orcs are corrupted elves, then like do they also endlessly reincarnate? Are they healed when they go to the halls of Mandos? Do they, when they sort of finish their time of waiting, are they healed? And it raises all kinds of kind of weird, difficult questions. So Tolkien lays that aside and works on a couple of other ideas. His latest idea, the one that he's working on at the time of his death, is that orcs are they're men, that they're twisted humans. And again, this raises all kinds of difficult questions that Tolkien wrote about, like, because he was very troubled by the idea that, well, if an orc can be saved, are you right in killing it? Right. And so so one of the versions that he works on, and this is what he's working on towards the time of his death, is this idea that orcs are a sort of unclean hybrid of men who followed Morgoth, and then these bestial forms that had been entered by these demonic spirits. And so basically you get kind of like if people are Lord of Spirits listeners, basically kind of like these Nephilim hybrid monstrous, half human, half demon kind of a thing. The point is that Tolkien knew that by making them either elves or men, that he was creating some like ontological or soteriological problems for himself, and he was aware of that, but he never finishes working it out.
So he doesn't figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when Christopher Tolkien and Guy Gavriel Kay are putting the published Silmarillion together, they go with the elf origin, which is one of two mistakes, or two or three mistakes that Christopher Tolkien said that he made later on. That
I didn't know that.
He said himself he shouldn't have gone with that version.
But what would he have chosen? Did he say what he would have chosen instead?
I don't remember if he said what he thought he should have chosen or not, but basically, like, if you want all the different versions, you can look at the history of Middle Earth, because they're all in there.
Okay.
I personally think, I personally think I do like the idea of them sort of being like demonic hybrids. I also like the sort of made from stone and then or wild, or these wild beasts, and then filled with these demonic spirits, which is basically the origin of dragons. It's basically the origin of like the werewolves, the vampires, all the other like monstrous things. So why not orcs? I feel like that's a nice sort of Occam's razor answer to the question. But
it also addresses the problem of their wholesale extermination, which seems to be the only answer possible in Lord of the Rings to what you can do to orcs.
Right. And there are, famously, there was somebody who wrote an unofficial sequel to the Lord of the Rings, from the perspective of the orcs, and was like, is that the Russian one? Yes. Yeah. So sort of famously, a lot of people have kind of had a problem with the whole scale extermination of the orcs. But the thing that people need to understand is that fantasy stories need demons to defeat. Yeah. And if you don't have if you don't have demons, if you don't have like the White Walkers are going to come over the wall, or if you don't have the cauldron board in the Prydain Chronicles,
which is what I'm reading to my son right now, and I'm realizing it's really affected me as a writer, but that's a different conversation.
Oh, interesting. I'm very curious about that. I love those books very much.
They're fantastic.
But like you need something that it's okay. Somebody expressed this to me in terms of role-playing games once. You always have to have zombies. Doesn't mean your zombies need to be called zombies, but you need to have something that this is an existential threat. It's going to destroy you. It's going to destroy everything you care about. It has to be killed. And you always need that in a fantasy story.
This is the thing that makes Game of Thrones effective. It's not the squabbling. So whatever people say about it being realistic and historically based and Wars of the Roses kinds of stuff, it's the reason it works is because there is the existential threat of winter coming. That's the only reason. Winter is coming. Winter's coming. The rest of it, you could find it anywhere else. You can find it in the Tudors. You can find a bunch of us. It doesn't set it apart from anything else. But having that existential threat is really what makes it rise above, for sure.
Yeah, you've got to have some kind of an existential threat that is so totally destructive to order, to civilization, to anything that you care about. That
and also inscrutable, not just destructive, but you don't need to understand it. Right. You shouldn't, because it can't be understood. And any attempts to do so result in your being overtaken by it. That's a very important point. Nobody in Game of Thrones, in spite of it being the most modern or postmodern of fantasy series, nobody tries to reason with the White Walkers. Nobody, because they know it's pointless. Right. So even in that world, which is post-nihilist version of 15th century England, even they know you don't do it. So that begs the question, Richard, why are these showrunners so invested in giving the orcs a culture and a religion and an identity? Why?
So, and just to be clear, I think that the showrunners, just like Jackson, like you could say we have multiple versions of the origin of orcs, and one of them, rightly or wrongly, made its way into the published Silmarillion. Yeah. Peter Jackson went with it. The showrunners are going with it. I think they're well within bounds to do that. I don't have a problem with that.
Agreed.
But the deeply sympathetic take that we're given of the orcs within the same frame of a deeply pessimistic take on the elves, all of them, really, really off-put. It's really disturbing to me, because basically what they're doing is setting that up is to say the elves are the oppressors,
Mm-hmm.
right? The elves are the ones who are oppressing us, and all Adar really wants is a homeland for his people.
That
And they
doesn't even
set
make sense.
and they okay, it doesn't make sense, but they've done such a poor job of making you care about any of the good guys in the show except for
They actually
Elrond
believe it when he says it.
that when he says it, I just sort of threw up my hands and I looked at my wife and she was like, "So why are we fighting the orcs at this point? Like
There you
all of
go.
the bad guys suck.
Mhm.
They're awful. They're terrible. The elves are racist and blah 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 blah."
Okay, and
And
notice the thing with the seeds. This is really interesting, right? So Aronder misuses the seeds. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but you're supposed to plant the seeds before battle. He doesn't. He uses them for medicinal purposes. He leaves them on his person. The only person and they keep going on about these seeds. They show up in the first episode. So there's I don't quite understand why, but okay, this is supposed to be a through line. It's supposed to kind of resonate. It doesn't work, but whatever. Adar plants the seeds before the battle in a land that's going to be scorched.
yeah,
What?
right.
I'm sorry. I don't. Why? Why are you working so hard to make this character so
Right.
appealing? Because honestly, he's the most fascinating, interesting character in the entire series. He really is
100%.
by far.
Yeah. And so then we get this scene where he's arguing, I just want a homeland for my children. So he's the
Mhm.
mother, right? Or
And the father,
they're
both.
calling him father, right? But
Yeah.
he's like the most maternal character in
But
the
he's
show.
like a devouring mother, though, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, maybe a little bit, except that he devours not his children, but like the other things.
No, but the devouring mother. So yes, the devouring mother devours her own children. But what I mean is, like, the mother who's been bereft of her children becomes the
Yes,
wild mother,
yeah.
right? So the mother who goes
Right.
and devours everyone else, right?
Right. Yes.
Because her children have been taken away from her.
Yeah. So Adar is basically is like, listen, I just want a homeland for my children. And then Galadriel says, well, I'm going to keep you alive while you watch me commit genocide on all of your children.
Yeah.
How are you going to like that? And at that point, it's like, okay,
She's the villain. Period.
you're trying to show us that Galadriel is the villain, and I don't think that's accidental. And for
No,
me,
it's not. It's absolutely on purpose.
for me, it hugely undermined my ability to appreciate Galadriel's improvement in episode 7 because I felt
agreed.
like, sorry, that turnaround was a little too fast for me.
Mhm.
Like if you know,
And the only reason she has a turnaround, then, according to the logic given by Morfydd Clark, is the sexual tension, right? So at
Right.
that point, you've just lost me. So I'm sorry.
So so yeah, it really undermined for me what was otherwise the most beautiful part of episode 7 because sorry, the turnaround's too fast. I'm not convinced by it. But also, like, there was no inciting incident that would cause the turnaround.
No,
Right? You're telling this kid what you think this kid needs to hear, but I mean, it's like the alcoholic who tells this kid, "Hey, don't drink, son." Right? And he's going to turn around and go out and get drunk tonight, right?
Well,
and
I mean, I suppose the argument could be made that her surviving an attack, a being overrun by lava, might be enough of a reason for her to rethink her life. But then apparently, lava doesn't work like lava in Middle Earth. It's just kind of red mist. So I don't know. Like, and by the way, the weird color symmetry between the what was apparently the battle of which one, what's the Elvish name, the unexpected flame,
Dagor Brachalak,
which is what it's supposed to be in episode 1, right? That's the battle we're supposed, that seems to be the implication, isn't it?
I had thought it was supposed to be like the final battle at the end of the War of Wrath, but I don't know.
Okay, maybe, yeah. But anyway, there's that the scene with the floating red bodies, and then now we have the red mist. So clearly, there's supposed to be some, again, pointless resonance. But
because that battle had eagles and dragons fighting, and that only happens in the that only happens in, the final battle of the War of Wrath.
I don't even care. So yeah, I don't even remember. But yeah, no, I agree, and it's another missed opportunity. And maybe we should talk about now the problem of scale, because this is we keep approaching this from different angles. This is another problem of scale. This show really has an issue with scale. First of all, they keep insisting on the necessity of there being a time squash, right, in order to be able to tell the story well. And you can make that argument, and I can accept that argument if you tell the story well, which they haven't been able to do yet, especially since, as I've already mentioned, they're stretching time in weird ways in some of the other stories where really we don't need it. I mean, the entire Harfoot story can be told in half an episode. Stranger arrives, stranger helps, stranger makes a mistake, stranger gets pushed out, stranger we go get stranger again. I mean, that's like, you don't need 7 episodes for this, right? And then the weird, like the quickness of events that lead to character transformations. That's the problem when you compress time. So if you're going to tell effectively a long-ranging story of character development, which needs time on screen to pass in order for it to be realistic, because all of us are humans and we all know how long it takes for us to get over difficult emotions, then you really have to do the work and try to convince us that this makes sense. But these things, they really happen very quickly. There isn't enough of an internal motivation for them to happen. And in Galadriel's case, that's very clear. So you kind of have to just float on top of the story without going deep, without really thinking about it. You have to turn your brain off and just kind of go, okay, fine, whatever. I'm just going to go with it. And if you do that, you can have an enjoyable experience, sort of, if you don't allow your brain to think too hard. Because as soon as you allow your heart in, you realize there's a lot of stuff that couldn't possibly happen and doesn't really make sense, especially with Galadriel.
So this is the thing that really frustrates me with many of the defenses being made for the show, which, first of all, like, if somebody just genuinely enjoys the show,
more power to you, man.
Yeah, like, I'm not like, fine, great, whatever. I probably like things you don't like, so it's not a big deal to me. But also, like, Amazon's a big evil megacorp. They can take care of themselves. Like, you don't. Like, yeah, don't need to rally to their defense, guys. Yeah.
No, you don't.
And they're not watching this. They don't care what I say. I'm not an important person.
They're gonna make all 5 seasons no matter what. It's just gonna happen.
Right. And but the thing that's frustrated me about the defense that so many people are mounting for the show is they keep saying things like, well, their hands are tied because ...
Yeah.
Okay, but their hands are tied because they only have access to the appendices, which is not really true.
No,
their hands are tied because there's too much time that they have to cover. The reason this is a bad argument, and this shouldn't be like a part of our criticism when we're doing, and by criticism, I mean good or bad, discussion of adaptation, is that you can decide before you start what story you're going to make.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Amazon is totally capable of saying, okay, we want to tell stories with time jumps, or we want to tell a more limited story, focusing not trying to cram the entire Second Age into 5 years, but let's do the most important parts of the or something. Right there, they had options, and at the end of the day, you can kind of, if it's your show, you've got the budget, you can decide that you're going to do what you want to do. So when you look at the decisions that they did make, the things that they have decided are important, right? By putting it on the screen, and by
this is the best
coming
option.
back to these themes over and over again, they're saying this is what is important about these stories. These are the best options, and then it's totally fair to look at those and just critique them. And one of the things that is very clear is that the showrunners don't have a good handle on the importance of time and space as part of the texture of Middle Earth. So to just give some examples here, and I did some math on this, and part of it was having run a very long tabletop campaign in Middle Earth. I'm just really familiar with distances and how long it takes you to get from point A to point B at historical travel speeds, because this is a question I've had to answer a lot, right? And so as soon as they leave Numenor, and then the next thing you know, they're galloping across the plains of, one assumes, Gondor or whatever. As soon as they start doing that, I started to my Tolkien nerd brain, my purist brain, started just saying, well, okay, but what route would they have taken? And if you think that this is an inconsequential question to Middle Earth, then you don't understand anything about Tolkien's writing, right?
Clearly,
because literally there are whole portions of the Fellowship of the Ring where they're just discussing which route should we take, right? So I just said, well, which route would they have taken? So I got out my map, I got out my Atlas of Middle Earth, which is a really great resource for this sort of thing, and it's really easy to tell that Umbar, let's say, which it's either Umbar or Pelargir are the two closest ports that Numenorians used in the Second Age. Um, they're about 1,600 miles from
Lord.
1,600 miles from Romena, which is the primary haven of Numenor. So just so people know, 1,600 miles is the distance from Norway to Greenland. Which is a distance that people have actually sailed, right? Famously so.
Yes.
On boats, you know, and so you can figure out exactly how long that would take.
Yeah, it wouldn't take 25 minutes.
Yeah, at historical travel speeds, how long would that take? And so just so people know, at optimal historical travel speeds, this assumes good winds, no storms, and very importantly,
creatures of the deep, of course.
No sea monsters attacking. But then of course, very importantly, no navigational errors. So for people who don't know, there is a 5 to 10 when you're traveling by sail, there's a 5 to 10% of distance traveled risk of overshooting your target, left or right, like north or south. And so depending on which port they were headed for, they could have ended up anywhere 160 to 380 miles too far up or down the coast. All that said, let's assume that Numenorians are really great mariners. We haven't actually been shown that they're great mariners.
No, we're shown that they're not very good mariners.
But we are told that the sea is always right. So there is that. True. But let's assume, let's give them some grace here and assume the Numenorians are the greatest mariners who have ever lived. So we can assume that they make the trip in the best possible time, landing at Pelargir. And let's say they do it in at top speeds, top speeds. Let's say they do it in 3 to 4 weeks, which would be like unheard of. Optimal sailing conditions the whole way. But let's say they do it in 3 to 4 weeks, and then and they make the trip to either Umbar or Pelargir. And at that point, you have to figure out, well, what route would they take to get to Mordor, which is where they're headed. Right. We have no idea how they know they need to go to Mordor.
And that particular tiny little town.
Right. Because the show has not told us. Presumably, there are a bunch of other villages in the Southlands. Otherwise,
are you sure? Because there's only one village, as far as I can tell.
They've done
the entire Southlands.
They've done zero work to show us that. But let's assume that there are other villages in the Southlands, because otherwise, you would be the Lost King of like 40 people.
But I think that's what he is.
Well, yeah. So at that point, you could say, well, what route would you take, for instance, from Pelargir, which apparently wasn't the port that they used, because we were told, she does have the map with the sigil on it. Yeah. But the sigil is like the entire region of Mordor, which is millions of square miles. Like, that's not a lot to go.
There's a lot of mountains there, too.
A lot of mountains there. Yeah. Anyway, but let's say that they had landed at Pelargir or Umbar. I mean, there are only so many places they could have landed, is the bottom line. And pretty much any of the routes that they would have taken were the routes that the Gondorians later turned into roads, because those are the only ways you can really go. Yeah. They couldn't have landed too far up the coast, because then they would have had to pass through the White Mountains, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So being really generous about this, let's assume that the Numenorians have amazingly good horses. I mean, but also like
they can fly.
Horses and like Pokeballs, because those were some very small ships they were sailing out on, and we're supposed to believe that actually they had hundreds and hundreds of horses in there so that they could do a full cavalry charge. Well,
I have been informed by Facebook that I am foolish and ignorant for suggesting such a thing. So yes, you're wrong.
What?
Yeah, you're wrong. It's possible. Yeah, Facebook said so. Yeah, because there were galleons with multiple levels. Back then, big galleons with multiple levels and lots of
but we can only go with what they show us on the screen,
and those are not huge galleons with multiple.
Which are not huge galleons with multiple levels.
Small ships.
I am not saying that the Numenorians in Tolkien's Middle Earth, that the Numenorians were not capable of assembling of building a really big galleon,
18th century style galleon. Yeah.
That could not be full of. Actually, at one point they were 18th century style galleons with like rockets. Fortunately, Tolkien scrapped that pretty quickly. But
that would have been cool.
I know. But I'm not saying that the Numenorians were not capable of such a thing, but the ships that they show us on the screen, which people, they're not real ships, they're CGI.
Yes.
What does that mean? That means you can make them look like whatever the heck you want them to
That
look
means
like.
they're actually blue boxes that are
Right.
bigger on the inside. That's what it means. So actually, we're in Doctor Who. That's what's going on.
But I mean, they could have made them massive, impressive galleons. You
Yes.
could have shown us a scene under the decks where he's going to comfort his horse, and there's like, oh crap, there's a bunch of horses in here instead of like 3 horses. Like you could have at any point in time, but
CGI,
it's very
right? Yeah.
It's very clear that the continuity of the logistics,
Yep.
right, just like space and time, that stuff isn't important to
we don't care. Let's move on. Let's move on.
It was important,
yes,
to like the Jackson trilogy, right? That's one of the things the Jackson trilogy does well, is they make it feel like it's a place, right? They
make it feel like it's a big place.
Yeah.
The distances are vast.
So at a bare minimum, let's assume they have magical, really fast horses and don't make any navigational errors trying to find Mordor, and don't have any trouble with guides or translators or any of these other things that invading armies always have problems with. And they know exactly where to go, which again, we have no reason to believe that they do.
Well, they do talk about Osterith, I think, before they leave, but still, I mean, that's
it's
like this tiny little pinpoint on the
map.
But,
right. But let's assume assuming all of those things, it should take at least a 6-week trip. And that's being really generous. At least a 6-week trip. So at that point, you have to say, okay, so clearly the Numenor storyline and the Southland storyline are asynchronous, because otherwise there's no way. And yet the show has done very little work to show us the asynchronicity.
Zero work. We're assuming it's all happening at the same time. We have no reason not to assume.
At the end of episode 2, we get the moment of synchronization for all the storylines.
That's right.
Because at the end of episode 2, everybody sees the same meteor falling at the same time.
That's right. Very good point. Yep.
So you can tie back to that and say, at one point, all of these storylines were moving at the same speed.
Yeah.
And then after that point, if you've made the point to show that to the viewers, after that point, you have to start doing work. You at whatever point the stories aren't supposed to be in sync, you have to sort of indicate that they're not in sync. But here's the thing:
at the very least, you go 2 months later. I mean, it's not that hard,
right? But it's like
super title.
It's like air moving around a wing, because you have at this point, we know these 2 points are touching, and we know in episode 6 these 2 points touch. So if we're synchronized here, we're synchronized here, and everything has just been shot for shot synchronized this entire time. There's no reason that the showrunners have given us to think that at some point the stories were out of sync with each other, and actually a whole bunch more time passed in Numenor than it did in the Southlands, which meant that they managed to get a whole armament together, sail to Middle Earth, navigate from Umbar to Mordor, and find this little town, this little village. It's not a town.
No, it's a few huts.
And they managed to do all of that in the course of like a week or 2.
Yeah, it's
not to mention Galadriel had to cross the Sundering Seas once already, and then swim halfway back, and all of that happened within like a couple of weeks. And so
but as we know, with the turning on of Mount Doom, physics doesn't matter. So let's perhaps we should move to the absolutely brilliant scene of water causing a lava eruption, because that's what happens.
I did
water
see like
causes lava.
Some geologist or something was explaining that this is some kind of a thing, like that can set volcano, but I don't know. I mean, this is not my area, and I didn't really pay a lot of attention to those.
Yeah,
so I don't know.
Flood waters from the surface going underwater can cause a volcano. Bite me. Sorry. Especially the way it was shown. It was like a little waterfall, and suddenly, what happens when water hits lava? It hardens.
Turns into steam. Yeah. It hardens the lava, turns into steam.
It doesn't explode. There's no TNT down there.
But even if it was valid
reaction that causes that to happen, that's insane.
Even if it was like a science thing, which
we've talked about already.
right. Even if it was a science thing, even then you have to sort of look at like, okay, so we were doing all the setup with the orcs digging, has been actually to show that, hey, they were making hundreds and hundreds of miles of underground trenches from some river. I forget which river that would be right now.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, sadly, you're right. It should matter,
Yeah.
but it doesn't. Um, and yeah, and that was supposed to be the payoff for all of that, like for the digger orcs species, the digger orc species.
Never mind that they can't be outside in the sun, so that has nothing to do with it. They dig because of
it was
water.
it was it was a plumbing job. So
yeah.
And then Volcano goes off, and the town gets totally Pompeii'd, except it doesn't. Like, do you know what happens to towns next to volcanoes when volcanoes go off?
Yeah, people don't survive. They don't, and we all know this. Like, we're not stupid. We know this. People do not survive. No, stop.
Yeah, and it's again, somebody might argue, well, they were too far away from the volcano, but then
they didn't even try. They didn't try to make any excuse. They didn't try to explain it in any way.
Right.
I mean, clearly, the final shot of episode 6 is Galadriel's going to die. Clearly,
Galadriel steps into the caldera of the volcano, and we know that she's not going to die because there's 2 more episodes in the season.
But at least also, try. Please give me some stupid, timey-wimey,
I ducked behind a piece of rubble just right at the last moment, kind of a thing. Like, yeah. And so this is the kind of stuff. And you can legitimately ask the question, all right, this is a work of fantasy. How much are we supposed to expect in the way of realism?
But if you're doing all this work to make it clear that magic has a system, if you're doing all this work to put cause and effect, if you have that whole stupid, idiotic thing about Mithril being a battery, then why suddenly at the end do physics not matter? Like, you've been making it very clear that we are in a world where magic follows clear logic and clear
rules.
And
this isn't magic. This isn't magic. This is just
it's just natural, right? So I guess magic has rules, but physics doesn't.
And I have questions about, why is there an evil lightsaber that is also the key to open a dam? Is that a thing that Sauron left? That doesn't make any who put that there and why? He
built the whole thing.
Right. But it's like
before he went north, before he got defeated and ran off north, because he knew that he would need this at a point.
But it's an elf dam, right? Like,
no. Yes?
No?
I don't know.
Who knows? Doesn't matter. Like, the showrunners. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm trying to rationalize things. I'm trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to sell me on this is like a cohesive vision of Middle Earth,
no,
it's just, and that's the thing that's missing. It's missing cohesion, and that's the most frustrating thing about it to me. I remember thinking when it first came out, I was like, well, it could be bad, or it could be just like really mediocre. And I almost hope it's just so bad nobody wants to watch it.
Right, because this is worse, because they keep tugging at you, and they keep thinking, okay, maybe they're going to get past this initial. Because there's a lot of things you can say, and we have been making we've been trying to steel man this the whole time. We've been trying to say, okay, the first few episodes are going to be difficult because you're trying to please everybody, because it's a difficult thing with so much expectation to make everybody happy. Fine, you're going to take your lumps with the first few episodes. You expect that to happen. It happened with Wheel of Time. It happened with a lot of other shows. They're going to get better. Maybe it doesn't happen. Okay, well, maybe there's going to be a payoff of this. We're going to get to predictions in 1 second, but I honestly think we're not going to get answers to any of the questions that were raised in the season at all. None. Sauron's not going to show up. The Stranger's not going to be revealed as anybody. We're going to have a bunch of cliffhangers that are not going to be tied to future storylines. They're going to be continuations of the same questions that were asked in episode 1, and we're going to have to stand on the edge of the cliff trying to make ourselves feel the tension that doesn't exist, because we know that it doesn't matter ultimately, because they're going to flip the rug out from underneath us anyway. And I don't know, it's just so frustrating, because it's not terrible. It's not really, really awful. They keep trying. They keep trying to do the right thing. They have these great conversations about providence. They have these excellent scenes of friendship. They have beautiful cinematography. It's so close, and yet, boy, it's not close at all. It's so far away.
So real quick, I do want to talk about the Mithril thing again.
Okay.
And the reason I want to talk about this is that there was a theory circulating around the internet that was started by the Tolkien professor Corey Olsen is the one who originally came up with this theory on his show Rings and Realms.
Yeah.
And on that show, he basically suggests that okay, this is clearly not something that fits in Tolkien's Middle Earth, and so what he argues is it doesn't actually work this way, and that this is just a lie that Sauron has fed the elves, and he's secretly deceived Celebrimbor, and Celebrimbor has deceived Gil-galad, and now Gil-galad is deceiving Elrond, and that Mithril doesn't actually have this effect.
So what about the
This
the leaf?
episode,
What about the leaf?
this episode, and I'm not calling out Corey or Professor Olsen or anything like that, but I do want to come back around to this because this episode deliberately confirms the whole Mithril, the origin of Mithril, the apocryphal story, right? And in two ways. One is it shows, okay, we have the fading of the elves as expressed by the corruption of the leaves of the great tree of linden, and exposure to Mithril heals that. Yep.
Even though it's a dead leaf.
That feels right. That totally validates Celebrimbor's whole theory. Yeah. About we need all the Mithril because it'll stop the fading of the elves. If we are meant to believe tree equals elves, which everything in the show like leads you to believe trees equal elves. Like yes, they're like what do elves like? They like trees. We should like lean into that a lot, right? And so yes. I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. I'm here for the dentological ontology or whatever.
I like that.
I'm here for it. But if we're to believe that's the case, as we are based on the conventions the showrunners have set up, then it's very clear the Mithril does heal the fading of the elves. Durin drops the leaf flutters all the way down to the bottom of the mine shaft.
There's the Balrog.
And there at the bottom, as you knew it was going to be, in the most ham-fisted way possible, they reveal, actually, there's a Balrog at the bottom. Surprise, children.
No!
But also, like, he growls, and I think that we're supposed to understand that the roaring of the Balrog is actually what's causing the seismic, shifts and whatnot. And so surprise, there's the Balrog. And the idea is the Balrog has been waiting down here since he got defeated by the elf, right? And so that's
that Balrog. Yes, it's
that Balrog, right? And so I knew this is where this was going. What I am very I'm surprised that they have the Mithril working in such an obvious way. I don't know why I'm surprised, but
I mean, I don't think. I mean, they really put a lot of effort into making that into a big reveal. I don't see how, even in puzzle block storytelling, I don't see how you could go back on that completely. I mean,
right. So at this point, they can't. And I do think that, I mean, the thing that they're trying to use it for, which is Durin the Younger's, Durin the Fourth's motivation to try to save Elrond's people, right? Like that's the catalyst for him to decide, all right, damn the torpedoes, we're going to go ahead and do what we need to do. So that's fairly effective within the conceit of the story.
Yes, but it's within the conceit of the story only, because if you consider that the problem with the Mithril is that they delved too greedily and too deep, you're going to have to do a lot of work to make Durin the Fourth, as he will be, too greedy. Because everything he's doing so far is well reasoned. So if that's how you're setting it up, you're once again undercutting the virtuous impulses of your characters, as you're consistently doing, as these writers are consistently doing again and again and again.
And it's interesting because I was talking to my wife about the Mithril thing and getting her take on it. And my wife is who listens to these, so
that's nice.
Be careful what I say,
Yeah, right.
But my wife, she'd be the first to tell you, like, she watches things for different reasons than I do. I watch them as a writer. She just watches them as somebody who enjoys stories.
Sure.
And because of that, I really like her perspective on things. It sort of helps ground me. Yeah. And one of the things that she said that was really frustrating about it to her was simply the fact that they weren't confident that anybody would find delving greedily and deeply as a compelling enough motivation.
Yeah.
Like they couldn't just let dwarves. The way she said is they couldn't just let dwarves be dwarves. Like
Yeah.
dwarves are greedy. Dwarves want treasure. Right. These are
That's right.
very basic
Yeah.
dwarf things.
Yeah.
And they
It's a perfectly fine motivation, by the way.
It's a perfectly
as
fine
a writer,
motivation.
I can tell you this. It's fine.
Right. And also like it's quite a relatable motivation.
Yeah.
You know, but they couldn't just let the dwarves be like, man, we found Mithril. Mithril is really awesome. Let's get it. And that be it. And then, you know, Elrond and Durin's friendship could have played out somehow in the scope of that, right?
It wouldn't have changed the dynamics of their friendship all that much, honestly.
Again,
there's too much complication. It doesn't really make sense.
The creators of the show were in no way constrained or hemmed in their choices about how to portray this whole Mithril thing. They could have just gone what was with it, what was in the Legendarium, because for them to have changed it means they felt like this was an improvement.
For sure. Yeah.
And the result is to kind of replace the deep rich depth of storytelling with this kind of, you know, what my friend Reno called myth light. Right, you know, there's the Balrog and Elf hit a tree at the same time a bolt of lightning strikes it, and we're going with that now.
No, and the funny thing is that most of the time, I've taken some screenwriting courses with some rather prominent screenwriters, and I've written some screenplay treatments myself, and they've actually won awards. So for what that's worth, but the point I'm trying to make here is that most of the time, the reasons given for significant changes to book related story motivations or plot points or whatever is the limitation in time of the medium of film. You have to fit a bunch of stuff into 2.5 hours. Okay? They have 50 hours. There are no limitations here. They can do whatever the heck they want. They don't need to use the usual excuse that screenwriters have about we have to compress all of this into a single story that convolutedly explains everything while simultaneously complicating the very simple desires of the main characters that could have just been allowed to play out normally. It doesn't make sense. So, and I'm sort of answering a lot of things that pop up on some of these Facebook feeds because there are a lot of people are really trying to, for some reason, come to the defense
and again,
of Amazon.
I'm so puzzled by the what is going on there. Like, it's fine if you just like the show. If somebody's just like, I like the show and I don't really care about your criticisms, I'm like, it's fine, not a big deal. But like, for people to come to Amazon's defense and start making, here's all the excuses why, you know, they had to do the things that they did. No, they had $1 billion.
Yes.
They could have done anything they wanted to do. This is what they wanted to do.
Yeah, clearly.
Sure, all creativity happens within boundaries, but the
there's not enough boundaries here, clearly.
That's that's part of the problem.
Well, let's actually end here, and I've given.
Do we want to speculate about the finale?
Yeah, I've given some of my thoughts. I'd like to hear what you think is going to
happen. I think that I'm going to go more optimistic than you, and think that Halbrand will be revealed to be Sauron at the end of episode 8, right. or at least to be part of Sauron, if my theory is correct.
God, I hope you're wrong.
And then I hope I'm wrong too. But I think that what this will lead to in the opening of season 2 will be about how do we keep Halbrand from re-embracing his Sauronification.
Okay.
And that'll be kind of the Halbrand and Galadriel story of season 2, along with Miriel. I also believe Miriel is going to get back to Numenor, and that's when we're going to get the actual revenge fleet, like the big fleet of Ar-Pharazôn, and Ar-Pharazôn will use the weakness of the queen because she's now been blinded, and I think they're going to tie the blindness to the Palantir in some way.
Yeah, that makes sense actually.
But that Ar-Pharazôn will use this to affect his full Trump. But he will rise to power. He will rise to power. He will put an army together, and they will go and keep the orcs from taking anyone's jobs. And so I think that the finale of season of episode 8 will be something like giant Numenorian revenge fleet. Is either putting together or headed back to the continent. It will be Halbrand. We learn who Halbrand really is, And I think that there will be no payoff with the stranger thing. I think that
Yeah.
we'll probably get a confrontation between the stranger and the Morgoth cultists,
Mhm.
and that will promise to reveal something, but I don't think
It'll
that
just be more
we'll get it.
manifestation of his power. That's it.
Yeah. I think we won't get like a huge payoff there yet. I think that trying to figure out who the stranger is going to continue to drag on through season 2. So
All right.
those are my predictions.
Here's my hot take.
Okay, yes.
The writers don't know who he is. They haven't figured it
That
out yet.
would be amazing. That would be amazing.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So anyway, those are my speculations. I'd like to be really wrong about the
Yeah, you did it.
Halbrand thing.
Halbrand, yeah.
Halbrand. I'd like to be wrong about that. And I do think they're going to continue to play up the romantic tension between Halbrand and Galadriel and turn this into a love triangle.
Demandriel. Salbrand and Demandriel.
Salbrand and Demandriel. The not the relationship Middle Earth wanted, but the relationship that we apparently all deserved.
Apparently. Oh, what a great place to stop, Richard. My goodness.
Yeah. So I think that's where season 2 is going. But who knows? I could be wrong. I bet
you we're all wrong about everything. I bet you they rewrite everything because the viewing numbers have been going steadily down. Something you aren't going to get unless you're actually paying attention. But people
who knows?
People aren't loving it.
Who knows? And I will just say, I always like to be an optimistic person. There are a lot of shows where I think the first season kicks rocks, and then they pull it together in subsequent seasons.
Yep.
So who knows? Who knows?
Yes, we can always hope that will happen. Well, we're going to discuss the finale and all our associated thoughts, not next week, even though the finale comes out next week. We're going to wait another week because I think it might be good for us to have some space between the viewing of the thing and the rants that will inevitably follow. And perhaps, you never know, they might all be extremely positive because maybe they will tie it all together in an incredible way.
Nice big bow. Maybe
Huge
they're going to blow my mind.
It could happen. Anything can happen. It's just, you never know. So that'll happen in 2 weeks. So there's that to look forward to. But in the meantime, thanks everybody for coming by and listening. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks.